Hello to everyone who joined us. We'll just take a few more seconds and then we will start our webinar. We're just waiting for more people to join. Thank you. So, hi everybody. My name is Einat Albin, and I'm the Academic Director of the Minerva Center for Human Rights at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I'm very happy to open this event celebrating the book of Charles Greenbaum, Haj-Yahia, and Carolyn Hamilton on political violence and children, psychological effects, intervention, and prevention policy. This book, published by Oxford University Press, touches upon a highly important subject, which unfortunately children around the world, and very much so in our region, experience on a daily basis. Bringing together scholars and practitioners from various fields of study and from diverse global locations, the book surfaces the problem and also, and very importantly, argues that the prevention of political violence to children is possible. As a lawyer, I am very much familiar with the rights set up in the Convention on the Rights of the Child that addresses some of these issues. And I found the book intriguing in a sense that it touches upon international law, children's rights, while also bringing together issues that concern the psychological effects on children and looking through this prism on this very problematic and concerning phenomenon. I'm very happy also to open this event on children's rights, as I see it from a legal perspective, because it's a wonderful opportunity for me to share with you that the Minerva Center for Human Rights will open the next academic year a new program on child and youth rights. And we are also in the midst of beginning to hire a chair for child and youth rights in the law faculty that will have a full tenure track position. The idea of the program, the first of its kind in Israel, is to put forth the rights of children and youth in Israel and the Palestinian territories, to engage in rigorous and hot topic research on the subject, cutting edge in the field. The program that will work together with the chair will hold conferences, workshops, and invite various scholars around the world dealing with these issues. We will have fellowships and residencies for PhD students and postdoctoral researchers working in the fields of children and youth rights. We will actively facilitate research by academics and practitioners working in the field and providing also scholarships and funding for research. And we hope that with this program and the chair, we can enhance the study of children and youth rights in Israel and work together with our colleagues from the various departments that are here in this event that we are celebrating the book to promote their ideas, of course, and others, so that we can have a better world eventually and a safe one for our children. I will hand over now greetings to Asher Ben Aryeh and to Ariel Knafo. But before doing so, I want to say a few thank yous for people who put up this event. So first of all, thanks goes to Charlie, Muhammad, and Caroline, who have been very collaborative, and it has been a very big pleasure for all of us to organize this together with you. We feel as if you are part of the Minerva Center's family. Of course, to Danny Evron, the Executive Director of the Center, for the hard work that he has been doing on this event, reaching out to people, organizing the technical and also the other aspects, very important aspects of the event, to Dari Nof, who is in charge of all technical issues, and to Anat Mishali from the Center for all the logistics. And now, Asher, I'm forwarding the mic to you.
Thank you very much. It's, you know, I'm in the new dean of the School of Social Work. I'm in position for about a month and a half. And definitely this is one of the good things or the benefits of being a dean. And saying a few words on my good friends and on this impressive book is really one of the benefits of becoming the dean, especially as my area of research for many years has been children's rights and children's subjective well-being. This is an impressive book, edited by impressive researchers who collected a very impressive group of papers and chapters in the book itself, who covers a phenomena that we are talking about or we talked about also in the past, but never in such a comprehensive way. And by highlighting the issue of children in conflict and in wars, and by highlighting not only the damages, but also the resilience and the good things that could be done and the prevention of the bad effects on those children, I think the book, by the mere fact of the collections of the ideas and the chapters and the studies and the people, would be a very impressive and important tool in the future effort to prevent harm from children. Because eventually, after all, beyond doing research, especially in our line of research, we are not doing research just for improving the knowledge of people, but also to try and improve the lives of children and to prevent harm from children. So I must say, and now I'll talk about Muhammad for 2 words. Sorry, Charlie and Carolyn. The Paul Berwald School of Social Work and Social Welfare is proud to say that Muhammad is among us. We are proud to be his academic home. We know that he has a lot more to contribute, not only in this book, but in his line of research. And we are looking forward to reading the next book. The only thing I can say as kind of a challenge for the 3 editors and the authors, and I will end by setting forward the challenge for the next book, I would really like in the next book to see some studies who are talking directly with children and not only with the parents and other people who are talking about the children. So in the next book, Muhammad, Charlie, and Carolyn, please include a chapter on what children, while they are children, not after they grow up, think about what the war is doing to them when they are children. Thank you very much for your enormous contribution till today, and thank you very much for the future contribution that I'm looking forward to read in the coming years. Thank you very much. And now I will transfer to my good friend and colleague Ariel Knafonor.
Good, Asher. Thank you, Asher.
Thank you, Asher. I'd like to join you in congratulating the editors for a very impressive achievement. As you know, children's rights are not only important, but they are especially important because children can be so defenseless, and they're never to be blamed for anything that happens to them in the sense of political violence. So this is a very unique place, and I'm very glad that this important book is coming out, and these wonderful colleagues have managed to address the key issues. So we have to understand the problem, and we have to understand what can be done, and what can be done has to be understood in terms of social, psychosocial interventions, as well as legal and regulatory interventions. And these are the 3 main pillars of the book. So thank you for doing that. I don't know, Caroline, but Muhammad is a dear colleague. And I want to say a few words about Charlie. Professor Charlie Greenbaum has been my teacher from my first day at the psychology department 30 years ago. And he was also chair, that's before I came. And I don't know anybody who has been so devoted to children's rights, such as Charlie. Of course, many other people, but I have witnessed Charlie's devotion in his work in Defense for Children International, for example, almost single-handedly in some of the, I don't know, the word battle is not the right word, but some of his struggles to help children across Israel and across the Palestinian territories. And I'd like to thank you, Charlie, for doing both the practical and the academic part of this, because you're a truly inspiring person in how you combine these 2 aspects. And so I'd like to congratulate you, all of the 3 editors, for their work and on behalf of the psychology department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel and Asher. And now we'll begin the session and the comments on the book. So I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Mona Khoury-Kassabry, the Vice President of Strategy and Diversity in our faculty, former Dean of the Social Work School at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Mona, it's a real privilege to have you here with us, and we look forward to the discussion that you are going to chair.
Thank you. And actually, I also want to congratulate my great colleagues and actually my teachers, Professor Muhammad Haj-Yahia and Professor Charlie Greenbaum and Carolyn Hamilton, that I didn't have the opportunity to learn with you, but I learned from you. So thank you for this, for taking this opportunity also to collect all this important information and editing a book that will help all of us, the researchers and the practitioners who are working in the field of children and youth, children's rights and political violence and its effects. And also I'm excited to be here and to moderate this section that will be led by three leading researchers and activists in the field of children well-being and particularly on children exposed to political violence. So we will start with our first discussant, and I will just share with you a very short bio about my colleague, Professor Layan El-Kernawi, who is of the Department of Social Work at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and Professor El-Kernawi is an expert in multicultural approaches to mental health and social work, especially with indigenous populations. He has served as the head of the social work department and director of the Center for the Bedouin, for the study of the Bedouin society at Ben-Gurion University, as Dean of the School of Social Work at Memorial University of Newfoundland, and the president of Achva Academic College in Israel. Professor El-Kernawi has published a lot of papers, books, and chapters, and the floor is yours, my colleague, Professor El-Kernawi.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm really very pleased to be here. You know, one of the issues I would like to start with, but before that,
Layan, I think I made a mistake, and now the editors should start.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I wasn't sure about what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because I think Inat was supposed to call them, but I'm sorry. So we'll start with the editors. Inat, can you lead that now?
Give them the respect, yes.
Of course.
Yes, sorry, you're definitely right. So we'll start with the editors of the book before turning to the panel. And I'm very privileged to invite Charles Greenbaum, Muhammad Haj-Yahia, and Carolyn Hamilton to discuss their very important book. So Charlie, are you going to begin?
Thank you, Einat. First of all, let me thank you and the people at Danny and Dari, the people at Minerva. You've worked very hard to bring this about and given us much support. It's much appreciated. I want to thank the participants, the people, so-called audience, but I hope it'll be an active audience. It's we appreciate very much your being here. Thanks to Asher Ben Aryeh and Ariel Noam Knafo Noam, their kind words. And I want to thank particularly the contributors to the book, the authors of the chapters. They wrote the book, the editors wrote a couple of chapters, but without them, of course, there wouldn't have been the book the way it is, and wouldn't have the scope that it is. Also, I want to thank all of the commentators whom you're going to hear in a moment. Sorry to interrupt, Alian, you're just about to begin. I'm going to just say a few words about the book and perhaps about the research aspects of the book very briefly. The book is about political violence in children, and we define, that is, at least the editors, there are many definitions of political violence. A number of people don't really know what it is. They know about other kinds of violence, domestic violence, for example, but political violence, there are a number of people who don't, and the working definition that we used was the use of physical force in order to damage a political adversary. This was essentially formulated by an Italian researcher who was looking at conflicts, including violent conflicts within Italy, Isabella della Porta, and essentially political violence has sort of taken the place of war as a conflict. In other words, as a concept, war is something that was traditionally between states, but we know now that many conflicts are both within and between states, and so we use political violence. Our goal in this book was to turn attention to the worldwide violence towards children with a view to understanding their psychosocial effects, to repairing the damage that's done particularly to children and families, and possibly preventing political violence. The problem of political violence, and this we mention in our book, is worldwide. It's very serious. Save the Children Foundation report in 2018 that the number of children living in a conflict zone has increased by more than 75% in the last 30 years. It's gotten to 357 million children, about 1 in 6 of the world's children, and I suspect that that's probably an underestimate. 1 out of 6 of the children in the world, some of us sitting here, have been victims of political violence as children or as adults. And I think that many of us know people who have been victims. I think that it's and particularly with regard to children, as Ariel said, the defenselessness of the children, the lack of responsibility for what is going on is very disturbing. We have 3 possible unique contributions of this book that haven't been done in quite the same way as before. First of all, we try to present research, intervention, and prevention of psychosocial effects as related, not necessarily integrated. Integration will take a long time, but they are related, and I think this is the first time that the 3 areas, research, intervention, and prevention, have been within the covers of the same book. Second, we want to raise the possibility that prevention of political violence towards children and families everywhere in every country, we're not talking about one country or the other country, is not utopian, but it can be accomplished. And in certain limited situations in the past, and these are documented in the book, they have been accomplished. That is, you can protect civilian populations and particularly children, even when the conflict is not yet resolved. And last, we hope that the book and the symposium today will promote discussion and thinking on the issue of what the social sciences and all of us can do to further the understanding and prevention of political violence. Thank you. And now I think I'm supposed to turn over the microphone to my good friend and colleague, Mohammed Haj-Yahia.
Thank you, Charlie. Let me first reiterate our sincere gratitude to Danny Evron, Einat Albin, and to Darinov of the Minerva Center for Human Rights at the Hebrew University for your dedicated work and genuine efforts for sponsoring and organizing this event. We really thank you, sincerely. Also, sincerest gratitudes go to each one of the authors who contributed their academic and professional work to our book, as well as to each of the 3 commentators, Professor Alian Krawi, Moshe Israelishvili, and Dr. Rima Salah. In my introductory words, I would like to refer to the second section of the book. As you know, one major section of our book is on intervention with children and their parents and families in the wake of their exposure to political violence that aim for mitigating the effects of this exposure and for enabling resilience in the face of political violence. This section is devoted to presenting 5 chapters on intervention at the community, school, family, and individual levels. These efforts contribute, in our humble opinion, to a multi-level approach to intervention that is necessary for enabling whole societies to benefit from intervention with children in light of their exposure to political violence. The authors of these chapters discuss highly structured programs as well as less structured approaches to counseling and therapy. In their chapters, they present research, assessment of interventions, as well as new interventions that show promise for mental health practitioners and that have not yet undergone systematic assessment. I will not go into details about each of the 5 chapters in this section, since I am sure Dr. Rima Salah will do that perfectly. But I would like to conclude also by expressing my sincerest gratitude to Charlie and to Carolyn for giving me the opportunity to learn from them during intensive work of at least 4.5 years. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Carolyn.
Caroline, I think it's your turn.
Carolyn, do you want to add a few words? You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Anat, for the introduction. And I wish I were part of the Minerva family. And I think that's wonderful news about the new program on children and youth rights. That's really exciting. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce section 3 of the book, which is about policy and law, about prevention of harm. I realized it's now 25 years since the mandate was agreed for the Special Rapporteur on Children and Armed Conflict, really quite a long period of time. And you might have thought within that 25 years, we would have seen some really big developments and even the end of the recruitment and use of children and bad effects on children of the impact of armed conflict. And I suppose one of the questions that this book raises is whether after 25 years, we can see any changes, what has progressed. And although we've seen quite a lot of legal and policy development, some real activity, there are still many challenges, huge number of challenges. And I was thinking as I was reading the newspaper today, one of those challenges is online recruitment of children, something we didn't think about 25 years ago. And neither did we really think about this very gendered dynamic of recruitment that is now taking place today. It was very much a concept 25 years ago that political violence largely involved men and boys. Now, that's just not the case. Just today, there was a big news item in the UK press about a 16-year-old girl being prosecuted for terrorism offences. In part 3 of the book, Liz Yarrow looks at that gendered dynamic in relation to recruitment and looks at the way gender ideals and fantasies are used to attract both boys and girls. And we know that girls are increasingly being brought in as active participants in political violence. And I think it's a question whether we treat girls differently from boys. In terms, for instance, I'm sure you've all heard of the case of Shamima Begum, who is still in a refugee camp in Syria, having been a jihadi wife, and will not be allowed back into the UK and has had her citizenship removed. You know, where's the victim element? She was 15 years old when she became a jihadi bride. What happens in cases such as those? And the chapter by Francesca Caponi also looks at the developments and progress being made in humanitarian law and human rights law, and sadly concludes that really many of the new measures have had what she calls scant impact, and how unenforceable some of the measures are. That's perhaps not so evident in the work of the International Criminal Court, and the chapter by Gloria Antibi-Davis looked very much at the work of the prosecution unit and how successful that has been in at least making some of the worst violators of children's rights accountable for their actions. However small the number that they prosecute, the fact that this raises awareness that those who recruit and utilize children in political violence will face some form of accountability is really important. And we look at that, and we look at the monitoring and reporting mechanism, which starts to collect good data on violations of children's rights. And we can see that there has been some real progress. The last chapter that's in part 3 is by Professor Aptel and her colleagues, and that looks very much at reparations and the role of education. How do you make some form of reparation to children whose lives have really been so affected by the impact of armed conflict? And they look at different mechanisms for accountability, for transitional justice, and conclude that children are often very disappointed with the results. Said earlier, you know, why aren't we bringing children into this? That's a very interesting question. It's quite difficult to bring children who are affected by conflict into research because they feel and have expectations that something will result from either research or from reparation procedures, from transitional justice procedures. And quite often there are no tangible results. So I think what chapter 3 does, part 3 does, is to reveal some of the really difficult issues and the fact that we need dynamic and flexible approaches with the ever-changing nature of conflict. And that's why I think it sits so well with the more research-based and psychological and psychosocial interventions that form the rest of this chapter. It's so good to see the different views all contained within one book. And my thanks for the very kind words of Mohammed and Charlie, and their determined efforts to make sure the law only took one part of the book. I very much appreciated working with them.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I think that after these introductions, we are all even more intrigued to hear now what the commentators also thought about this excellent book and its very rich chapters and discussion. And so before I turn to Mona, and after I introduced her before, I'm sorry for the mess, I just want to inform all of our audience how you can ask questions. So throughout, you can ask questions, of course, the editors of the book, Charlie, Mohammed, and Caroline, and also our commentators and speakers. You can use down below, you can see the Q&A, not the chat box, but the Q&A, and write down questions, and we can forward it to all speakers at the end of our next session. So Mona, here's to you.
Thank you, Einat, and thank you, the editors of the book. And now, again, I'm turning to you, my friend, Professor Karnawi, after I present it to you, so you can start.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mona. And good evening, everybody. Good morning if you are in the States or in Canada or somewhere. Yeah, I think, looking at the book, which is entitled Handbook of Political Violence and Children's Psychosocial Effect, Intervention and Prevention Policy, it's a very interesting and challenging. And, sometimes I prefer to write a book by myself rather than to edit a book because, running after the contributors, write again and again and again, it's not an easy process. So I really appreciate what you did. And I think before I started, I would like to congratulate Charles, Muhammad, and Caroline for the excellent work. And as Charles said, the three areas where you look at, and these are the research and we relate to that, and the intervention and the prevention. And this is not an easy, task. Bringing worldwide scholars from all over the world to bring them together to come up with an excellent volume such this, it's raised, always a lot of questions about what is the contribution of the volume. And I agree, like all of us talk always, what is the contribution of the book or any articles? There is a huge contribution to the body of knowledge. There's a huge gap in this area, particularly when we talk about political violence and the impact of political violence and the new generation. And in some of my writings, actually, I call them tomorrow players. And these are some of the studies I conducted back then. And these are tomorrow players in the region. So if we would like to look at the world and see what we do to children and adolescents who grow up in a conflict zone, in a war zone, how we contribute to the world. I think the future of these children's not promising. And I see when you talk about the intervention level, look at the policy level, but I think there is some kind of ignorance, including my writing as well, to the politicians. To what extent we can bring these data, this information to not just to the policymakers, but to the politicians. Because by the end of the day, these kids we are talking about will be the leader of the region. If we would like to focus only in the Israeli-Palestinian region, these kids who will lead the region with the psychological, traumatic events that they went through in both sides, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. So we have to look at the future. We have to think about the prevention in a different way, not just to bring the data to the policymakers and to provide more services or not more services, etc. That's a very important, but I think one component it's missing. And let me, with your permission, read something on one of my projects, something which is said by a Palestinian teacher. A Palestinian Arab teacher looks across his classroom in the West Bank and sees an empty chair. A young fellow sat there yesterday, and he may return tomorrow. He may not. Why is he out? Will he ever return? Perhaps he was a victim of the seemingly endless violence. Or perhaps his father was, and he must now take over responsibility for what's left of the family. This is a very interesting say when we brought in Palestinians, teachers, social workers, practitioners together. And this teacher, he said, I would like to learn about the empty chair in Sderot. which is close to Gaza, a Jewish city. That's something which start to, let's say, increase my attention to what's going on in this region. So with what I said now, I would like to look at some of the, section, the research section, which is, I think it's very well done. But, this book dealt with different topics related to political violence or exposures to political violence. But how we do research with children? Do we interview their families? Do we interview them? Do some of these kids know to read and write? How we do that? To what extent we can rely on the qualitative or quantitative methodology? And I saw there is really a big topic here dealing with the issue of research and ethics when we interview kids, how we interview kids, to what extent they are really master the language, the body language. I mean, there's a lot of issues here we need to take into account, and I'm very pleased to see that the contributors relate to that. We see also a lot about qualitative and quantitative, and that's something which is a real contribution to the body of knowledge and real contribution to this volume, because it's bring scholars, leading scholars who bring the voices of the children. Regardless of how we did that, I think it's very important. But there is some issues here, and I'm pleased that I saw that about the strategies of interviewing kids. We did that actually with the Palestinian, and then we trained some research assistants to stay close to the kids, sometimes to read the questions for the kids. Bear in mind, living in a political zone affected the reading and writing of children. Some children missing the schools for months or whatever. Adding to that, these days, the COVID-19, which has also expanded the gap between families and communities and society. So I see reading these chapters, and I see the influence of the political violence in the relationship between children and parents. It's an issue. It's a very important. The same with the intergenerations effect of trauma. The whole process that we started to see how the political violence affected the family functioning. And we did so that among the Palestinian as well as among the Syrian refugees in Jordan. There is effect, I must say, probably in a certain points led to more violence within domestic violence within the family. Because being the parents who live in a war zone, who are affected by the ongoing political violence in our region or in Syria, or this among the Syrian refugees in Jordan, that's affected the role model of the kids. The parents actually behave not in a proper way, if I may say, when they respond to their kids, because they are under pressure, because there's less services provided for these kids. In Israel, we have a lot of services. In Canada, there's a lot of services, psychological, social, educational, etc., which support these kids. So we have to think about our children who really grow up in a conflict region, a war, time of war everywhere, and there are no services. So we are expecting their parents to fill that gap, and the parents themselves under pressure. We saw that recently. I just completed 2 major studies in Jordan, where we collected data. We look at the parents, mothers, and fathers, and we saw the psychological problems that they present. The same with the children. But something which is, I think it's crucial, and it's a very important to mention among the Syrian, and this is something which is, I think it's fair, and we should look at that when we talk about children. You have to bear in mind gender, cultural issues, and the political context where it's happening. These are very important. So, for example, in one of the studies which is we completed in 2018 among Syrian refugees in Jordan, we found something very interesting, which goes back to the cultural context where we need to explore the psychological problems among the kids. In contrast to previous studies on political violence in the Arab world, female respondents had lower level of psychological symptoms and lower level of PTSD compared to the children. That's because of a cultural issue. The families, and we interview these families, protected the girls. They kept them inside the house. The children were out, so they were exposed to the rockets, to the missiles, to the attack, to the whatever. That's a very interesting. That's a cultural issue. The family, they wanted to protect the girls because of the family honor and stuff like that. So that's a very important. And I think one more point, I hope I'm okay, Mona, with the time.
Let's take a few minutes more.
One more thing, which is, I think it's a very important when it comes to the intervention. How we do intervention in the Arab world, how we do intervention with, let's say, people who are coming from different ethnic backgrounds. It's different. I mean, when we look at the way these people, let's say, express their psychological or social or familial problems, it's a different way. So we have to be aware of the idioms of distress, how these people communicate with us as a practitioners, as a scholar, their psychological problems. How we do that with the children. And I think there is something here important to talk about, art therapy with the children. That's a very important component. So I think if we look at the whole process of, as I mentioned before, just to conclude, the location, gender, and the political context, these are very important. And emotional expression, it's another issue which we need to take into account in our intervention. So finally, I would like to say this is a very important volume. It's bring in excellent scholars and practitioners who really came up with an excellent volume, and not just, as I mentioned before, a real contribution to the body of knowledge, but also a very much stimulating in all levels, at the research level, the intervention level, and policy level. And I want to add, as I mentioned before, sorry to repeat myself, the political issue, because these kids will be what we call tomorrow players. And the Palestinian Israelis, who are going to be the prime minister of Israel in 10 years, not Bibi Netanyahu anymore, but anyway, just who going to be there? Who's going to be in the Palestinian side? These people who grow up there. So we have to look at the future of our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kernawi. And I will move now to Dr. Sarah, and I just want to encourage the audience to ask questions in our Q&A. So please feel free to ask questions, and we will have a discussion at the end of the representative of the discussion. So we are moving now to Dr. Rima Saleh. Dr. Saleh served as a member of the United Nations High-Level Independent Panel on Peace Operation and as a Deputy Special Representative of Security General, UN Mission in Central Africa Republic and Chad. Dr. Saleh has had a distinguished career with UNICEF, including Deputy Executive Director for UNICEF for several years, and Regional Director for West and Central Africa, and UNICEF representative in several countries, including Vietnam, Pakistan, and other countries. In October 2015, Dr. Saleh was elected to chair the newly formed Early Childhood Peace Consortium, of which Yale and UNICEF are founding members. She is a researcher at the Child Study Center, Yale School of Medicine, and is a co-editor of the volume at MIT Press, Pathways to Peace, the Transformative Power of Children and Family. Professor Saleh, we will be happy to hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Khoury. Good morning and good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to be with you. And I wish to express my deep gratitude to Professor Charles Greenbaum, to Professor Muhammad Haj-Yahia, and to Professor Carolyn Hamilton for inviting me to serve as commentator for the webinar and for their book, Handbook of Political Violence and Children, Research, Intervention, and Prevention. I would also like to thank Professor Danny Evron, the Executive Director of the Minerva Center for Human Rights in the Hebrew University, for his gracious invitation. I would like to pay tribute to the editors for this landmark book, which is visionary, transformational, and essential in understanding the psychosocial aspects of the effects of political violence on children, intervention and prevention of violence as a path to the protection of children in the midst of armed conflict and the realization of all their human rights. This pioneering work is very timely in these very intense and difficult times where violent conflict is unfortunately on the rise. Hence, researchers, practitioners, and advocates for the well-being and the rights of children will always be indebted to you, the authors and the editors, for enriching the literature by scientific evidence and practice, and demonstrating of how multidisciplinary action is the right path to achieve the best results. Today, millions of families and their children find themselves trapped in situations of war and violent conflict and displacement. We have now more than 80 million people that are displaced. All this disrupt the fabric of their societies and compromise the very foundation of their institutions, including the family. The vulnerability of the family is further exacerbated by the separation of its different members and the erosion and destruction of all protective systems. So in the absence of protective systems, it is the family, the parents, that emerge to build a protective environment for their children and safeguard their well-being. But the exposure of parents to instability and stress challenges their ability to provide for their children the protection and the nurturing care they need. As the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations who is the representative for children and in armed conflict, Miss Virginia Gamba said, millions of boys and girls wake up every morning in communities affected by war with little or no access to the protection they need. My comments here are informed by my 30 years long experience with the United Nations and the Department of Peacekeeping Operation, and also by the work that we are doing with my colleagues at the Yale Child Study Center on the work of investing in the early years of life to reinforce the scientific and practice-based evidence on how investment in early childhood development can contribute to sustainable peace, social cohesion, and social justice. And this as a path to social transformation and prevention of violence, more important. And families and children, it's very important to say, families and children, when empowered, can be agents for change, for peace. In the section of this book, Interventions for Enabling Resilience in the Face of Political Violence, there are very excellent interventions. The authors demonstrated the crucial value of integrated, particularly multi-level intervention to mitigate not only the immediate, but the long-term impact of wars, violent conflict, and displacement on children, families, and communities. The intervention benefited the child in all the life cycle, because from early childhood to adolescence, the parents, the families, and communities. The intervention went from promoting and protecting and caring for children's mental health. And you know, mental health is very important now. And we just celebrated last week the Day of Mental Health. And for the first time in history, the UNICEF released last week a report on mental health. So this is the first time. So mental health is very important, and we saw it in chapter 11, 12, and 15. And what is also very important, also, it went to the families and to parents. We saw, and I told you how important is the role of families and parents to really mitigate the impact of war and conflict on their children. So we could see that in chapter 13 and in chapter 14, the importance of parenting and how empowering them can protect their children. And what is very important is that the interventions were delivered at home, in schools, in kindergartens, and also in the community, which is very important. The community was also involved. All these spaces, the home, the school, and they play an important role in children's daily life and give them a sense of security and stability. The involvement of members of the community in delivering services, including parents, teachers, community and health workers, and social workers, enables the sustainability of the intervention and programs, and also permit to take it to scale, because those are excellent interventions, but how do we take them to scale to benefit many children and families across the world? Yes, the programs and interventions, they take us from Israel, Palestine, to Rwanda, to Uganda, to Somali, Bantu, and Bhutanese refugee communities in New England. That is why cultural considerations are very important. Unfortunately, most of the research is done in the global north. But The problems are in the global south. So how to integrate and how to make this, to contextualize this of intervention is very key to the success of the intervention. It's very important, I repeat again, the cultural considerations. And when we design programs, they have to be cultural sensitive. So the intervention also reinforced the importance of early childhood development programs in times of adversity, and rightly so. We know that the plight of children and their families living in situations of violent conflict and displacement continue to haunt us all, and it should continue to haunt us. But what is more alarming and should concern us all is the lasting and negative impact of deprivation and violence on young children, and how these detrimental effects will eventually affect all our communities and societies. Yes, science tells us that the exposure of children to toxic stress and adversities at an early age can impair their neurobiological development and will likely prevent them from their full development. And the negative outcome include emotional and behavioral problems, which can become self-perpetuating and can continue for generations to come. But the good news is that the neuroscience and other multiple disciplines indicate how early childhood development services can prompt members of high-risk groups to rebuild trust and develop long-lasting resilience, which is very important. So the science heralds a new era for us, asserting that ECD and the early childhood development strategies and programs are vital, and there are opportunities for building a sustainable future for the world's children. And we have multiple promising programs that we saw in the book, particularly in chapter 14, that have been developed, evaluated, and disseminated. But we have also examples from Northern Ireland, from Afghanistan, from South Africa, from Nigeria and Turkey, Brazil. And this reinforces the holistic and inclusive approach to mitigate the trauma. And this is for all our children, and to promote emotional regulation and to encourage the formation of positive social relations within the families and also in the communities. In all this, effective and positive parenting is crucial and is very much reinforced in chapter 14. But to support and empower them is very important, and particularly when risks are high and resources are limited. As the previous speakers mentioned, in countries that we have, the parents, the families have no access even to services. And I just want to tell you that UNICEF just published a strategical note on UNICEF's vision for elevating parenting, key actions needed to enhance parenting support throughout the life course. And I would invite you to look at it. I want also to mention here the importance of education in general that was mentioned but was not reinforced in the chapter, and the need to get children in schools during or immediately after armed conflicts. My service to UNICEF took me to many parts of the world, as you mentioned, in Africa, Asia, that were marked by poverty, by violent conflict, and crippled by instability. There, I met children who had been traumatized, displaced, and orphaned, who had never seen a school in their lives. Instead of spending their days in the simple joy of childhood, they were trapped in being combatants. Yes, it is the story of lost childhood. But amidst the war, the UNICEF teams there negotiated with all relevant parties, the warring parties, for some days of tranquility. Yes, we managed to stop the war so that children and their families could have access to basic services and to humanitarian relief. We exerted all efforts to build a protective environment for children by also demobilizing child soldiers and integrating them with their families, by organizing also child-friendly spaces, even in refugee camps. So all those are interventions that can protect children during war. We organize the back to school campaigns in many countries. And really, I wish you were with me to see the eyes of boys and girls going back to school. For example, in Southern Sudan, in Liberia, in Congo, in Afghanistan. And they were full of joy and hope that replaced sheer destitution and hopelessness. There is no doubt that education plays an enormously constructive role healing war-torn communities. Of course, education also gives a sense of normalcy and protection to children and their families. But now we talk about how to protect children from violence, how to prevent also the impact of violent conflicts on children. Yes, to do that, we need to improve. We need to improve the knowledge base on the greatest threats of violence to children that also include structural violence that causes systematic deprivation through unfair political systems, social inequalities, social and political marginalization and exclusion. All those are also violence that affect children. Also, to protect children and families from violence, we need to strengthen in every country the child protection system that seek to address all the full range of risk factors in the lives of all children and their families, and cut across the social and the social welfare, education, social protection, and particularly the justice system and health. Further, all global commitments should be translated into national context. Yes, we have resolutions. Yes, we have plans of actions, but they should be translated into national context, and particularly the Convention on the Rights of the Child that was mentioned in the beginning. Although adopted more than 30 years ago, it has not lost its urgency and its relevance. It is the most comprehensive statement of children's rights ever produced. It's comprehensive and universal and applies to all children. And when I say all children all over. And
Dr.
it's a new...
Dr. Saleh, just a...
Yeah, finished?
Yeah, can
yeah, just
summarize, please?
Yeah, and a new era of new ethics for the protection and care for children. Permit me to end with a call to action. Let us elevate our voices, all of us, and entreat our governments and policymakers to safeguard the rights of all children and families and protect them in situation of armed conflict. Let's all elevate our voices and let's make our governments and policymakers accountable because they signed on all the conventions. Let us persist in the pursuit of knowledge, addressing the gaps of science with a focus on interdisciplinary research and with the lens, gender also lens, and to further reinforce the evidence to inform global policies and national policies. At the end, let us all unite our strength to change the tide of violence, all of us, from academia, from practitioners, from civil society, and help every child and every family fulfill their rights and restore, most importantly, their dignity. It is our shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleh, for this, for your comments. And now I want to move to our third commentator, and Professor Moshe Israelashvili, who is a professor emeritus from the counseling program of the School of Education in Tel Aviv University. Over the years, he published more than 100 papers and chapters in various peer-reviewed journals and books, and he is co-guest editor for special issues in 3 different journals. He is a member of the International Committee of Society for Prevention Research and serves as the chair of the prevention section of the American Psychological Association, Division 17. This year, he received the Lifetime Career Award for the International Stress, Trauma, Anxiety, and Resilience Society. And we will be happy to hear your comments now. And try to do it in 15 minutes, and then we can have a discussion and questions, and then we will move to the editor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khoury. And I would like to thank, first of all, the 3 distinguished editors, Professor Charlie Greenbaum, Professor Muhammad Haj-Yahia, and Professor Carolyn Hamilton, for this very, very important volume. I think it's very enriching. It's a very comprehensive book. I think it's a very timely book because there are many questions that nowadays we should address, and they are reflected in the book. And more than this, I would like to compliment them for raising so many major and important topics that should be addressed in the future. I should confess that while I was reading the chapters, and not only from my section, but also other sections, so many questions and so many topics raised into my mind. And I think that everybody who will read the book will be very much tempted to go further and explore more and more about this issue. So this is, I believe, this is the major role that any book, any volume should wish for. And I think this time it's very successfully been achieved. So thank you for inviting me to reflect. And I have to speak about section 3. And I would like to start with making a few general comments about the topic of the book. And then I will consider the 4 chapters that I was asked to refer to, very shortly, each one of them. And then to conclude with several comments from the perspective of what we call now prevention science. So speaking generally about the topic of the book, the issue of the book, I think that we have to pay more attention. And I have no doubt that many of you are aware of it, that there are several terms, major terms that change, their meaning is changing over the recent years. And the first one is the meaning of war. You know, the old traditional image of a soldier holding a gun and fighting another soldier, this is more and more irrelevant anymore. Wars tend to be much more into civilian population, especially due to missiles and so forth. Many times you see that even, you know, the one who attacked the other, too many times actually is trying to approach the civilian, the unprotected civilian, and even ignore the soldier. The soldier who is trained to fight somehow remain aside from the situation. This means that more and more civilian, and of course children, are exposed and will be exposed to all kinds of political violence, all kinds of war, aggressive activities, and so forth. So this is the first topic that its meaning is changing. Another topic is the term soldier, or the person who is fighting. Because of the changing of the battlefield, the duties of soldiers are changing. New occupation for soldiers, new occupation for people who are not in the combat zone. And it also goes to the civilian population. We tend to believe that those who live close to the border are at risk for all kinds of harm, but it's not relevant anymore. All kinds of people are involved in different spaces, in different fields, and we should be aware about the differences between all these kind of people, because sometimes these differences are very much important for better understanding what's going on. I think that another topic, which is another issue, which is significantly changing along the recent years, it's the term child, a child. A child, we have the image of a child, but what we should be aware is how young parents, how do they perceive the meaning of a child? And unfortunately, and this is my own impression, unfortunately, along the years, the role of a child, the importance of a child within the society, within families, is lower than it used to be. You know, first of all, many parents don't want children, and you see it in the birth rate. Secondly, they give birth in older ages, and so forth. You are all aware of these topics. So it's not only that the child is facing a kind of political violence that he has to address and cope with, his starting point, his resilience, regardless of the political violence, is not the same it used to be. And no doubt that the family is very much important, but the family is changing. And if the family is changing, who is the child that has to cope with the situation? To what extent he is able or she is able to cope with it the same way that previous children, previous generation could cope with such situation? I would like to to draw your attention to one point, and the point is to what extent adults within the society perceive themselves as the role model for children. I think that my own impression, and there are some data about it, that less and less adults see themselves as the role models for the children. They expect the school to do the work. They expect the society to do the work. They expect the grandparents to do the work, which means that the child today is in a very, very tender situation. Another topic that meaning is changing is the meaning of violence. You know, violence and aggression, it's one of the oldest phenomena in history, right? But interestingly, it finds new ways, new channels to express itself. And I'm talking, of course, about the cyberbullying, all kinds of cyber-related aggression, shaming, and so forth. So it raises another question. What is the difference between exposure to political violence and exposure to other types of violence? But again, I would like to return to the child. To what extent this child has been exposed to all kinds of violence in other fields, and then suddenly these children are obliged to encounter another violence, which this time is a political one. And finally, the last topic that we have to reconsider is the term of the society. To what extent society really supply all kinds of intervention, all kinds of ways for the civilian to handle all kinds of situations? To what extent do the society is really cohesive as it used to be in all the time? Now, after mentioning all these kind of general comments about the changing nature of the topics, I would like to go and mention, as I said, to make several comments about each one of the 4 chapters that I was asked to read. And the title of the section is Prevention of Harm to Children and Families from Political Violence, Law and Public Policy. And really the 4 chapters are more oriented toward topics of legal, law, policy. But if the title is prevention, then we have to also be aware of other aspects of prevention. And I would make some kind of comments regarding to this child. The first chapter by Capone speaks about child soldiers. And the topic is very much, I would say, well known, but one question is, what is the amount of children that are really could be titled as child soldiers? And maybe there are all kinds of types of child soldiers, and other questions is emerging from the book, and the author really speaks about active involvement or indirect involvement, which is really a question that should be addressed in the future. The question of what is the age that the law regard as a child? Is it the age of 15 or 18? And there is kind of debate about the proper child, the proper age or the proper timing of defining a person as a child, or maybe is already an adult. And it has a lot of meanings, of course, for the law and for the implications that are related. Speaking about child soldiers, the chapter really raised the question of what about these children who volunteer to be soldiers? So we know that sometimes they are obliged, they are even kidnapped, all kind of very powerful obligations that are put on them, and they have to obey. They have no chance to obey. But there are some children who voluntarily join it. And some of these children do it on the background of a family who supports the activity of volunteering, of joining the military activities. So how should we consider this child? And this topic is very much important. For example, and I'm just referring to topics that the author is mentioning. For example, in terms of punishment, once the war is over, how should we consider a child soldier that volunteered? Should he or she be punished at all? Maybe the family should be punished. The author speaks about the laws, and there are laws that refer to it, but again, there is a question of who will enforce the laws. And the system that will enforce the law seems to be one of the weak components in the whole process. Just for one example that the author is mentioning, the organization, the major organization that followed this kind of political violence and tried to take responsibility for changing the situation is the United Nations. But not everybody, every society, every group of terrorists is a member of the United Nations. So who should take responsibility? Is it the state? Is the state possible of taking the responsibility? And another topic that the author is mentioning is what's happening after the war. How can we rehabilitate? How can we take these child soldiers and integrate them back into society? And you know, this is a topic, I came across this topic recently. I had to write something about immigration and refugees. And then I learned what happened in Camp Menorah in Greece. It's a camp for refugees from Syria. Interestingly, what happened there is that the management of the whole camp, the way that they approached the topic, I mean, the manager of the camp, how they approached the camp was so bad that instead of helping the refugees starting to find their way back to normality, rehabilitate their life, the camp made the opposite action. It turned people into more depressed. It made people having more mental health problems. So all the topic of rehabilitation, once the war is over, is a very important point that the chapter is talking about. The other chapter by Atiba Davis, she speaks about, the author writes about the International Criminal Court, and the court is established and there are all kinds of activities. And one of the points that the author is mentioning is how can we affirm a commitment, not only of governments, but also of people inside the institutions such as the United Nations, commitment to follow and take into court these people who cause the children all kinds of problems. This is not an easy topic because, you know, one of the questions, and this is only an example, one of the questions that emerge, is it right to take the person who made the harm to the children and punish this person in front of everybody when we remember that some of the children, even though the violence is over, seems to be over, these children who've been attacked are still sometimes exposed to this person, to this leader, to this prime minister, to whatever, to his troops. So how to manage the situation? What can be done in order to advance a culture that's, I'm quoting the words of the author, what can be done in order to advance the culture of good practices in running the whole process of bringing those who made cause to children into the international criminal court. And the general recommendation is to establish a child-sensitive approach. And this is, of course, a very important definition or request, because, you know, too many times, and I'm not criticizing anybody, but too many times people are so much concentrated on their job and they miss the child. And I will give you one example. If you are coming to the court and there is somebody who raised the case and give all the details, the court and all the adults around, speaking from the legal point of view, they have all kinds of discussions, and too many times they might not be aware of the child who is there, who is listening to them and what's going on. I'm continuing on to the third chapter. This is a very interesting.
You can, Professor, yeah, Moshe, if you can just, you have like 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The third chapter of Eptel and her colleague is talking about transitional justice. And I like this term very much because, you know, justice is a very, very interesting topic, and there are all kinds of justice. And speaking about transitional justice, they speak about the time when the war is over and things should be moving backward into normality, and who takes care of the children to make their transition back to normal life more important. And of course, the recommendation, and it's very profound recommendation that the education system should take it into account. And I, as a member of the School of Education, couldn't say anything against such a recommendation. It's extremely important. But I would like to raise one comment, which the authors raise as well. Speaking about the teachers, You know, the teachers were also being involved in this political violence. Are they able to support the children? Are they able to discuss all kinds of things to take care of the mental health of the children? My experience here in Israel, and I believe that other people in other parts of the world would agree with me, that too many times the children, the teachers themselves are in need for help. So to have expectations from the educational system is very much important. It is as a role of the educational system, but we have to think very carefully how to do it, and the author talk about it more. And the last chapter by Yarrow speak about gendering, and they speak. The author speaks about the role of a female, young female, and how do they are involved in the situation. And I would like to take one of her comment and raise it. Too many times, two comments. Too many times people believe that wars are very much influenced by religion, and this is true. But it's not only religion, it's also the gender, the age. Adolescents are very much eager to be involved in all kinds of activities. And as they mentioned, as the author mentioned, sometimes the adolescent, for an adolescent, being involved in a war zone serves the developmental needs of this child. And we have to take it into account both in terms of how to address this child and in terms of how to prevent all kinds of related activities. So I would like to finish by, as I mentioned, a few words about prevention in general, which are related to the topic of the section, the prevention of harm, and the book in general. You know, in prevention science, nowadays we don't differentiate anymore between prevention and promotion. So I should confess that Charlie mentioned it in the beginning, that there is need for integration, and I do support this call for integration between the section on intervention and the section of prevention. You will never be able to prevent anything unless you know what kind of skills, what kind of cognitions and so forth you would like to promote. So this is a kind of two-component process that should be taken into account. Another comment which relates to prevention, and it also been made by the previous speaker, Professor Salah, is the topic of cultural adaptation. You know, to take a prevention program or any intervention program and to make the cultural adaptation, it's a long process. And too many times you see that if it is not well adapted, not only that the results are not positive, but sometimes the result might be negative. So even here in Israel, if you take a very good intervention for the Jewish population, it might not be efficient at all for non-Jewish population and so forth. So the issue of cultural differentiation is very much important, which means that if we are talking about political violence, we should be more aware of differences within the various aspects of political violence in different parts of the world. And finally, the last comment, I would like to mention that the topic of resilience, you know, everybody speaks about resilience, but the topic of resilience itself is very much unclear. But what is clear now, and there are a lot of evidence for it, is that many of the people, more than we would have been expected, are resilient. Not everybody is infected the same way. So what we have to do is really to have better assessment, better ideation of who is more vulnerable to all kinds of political violence, and to make differential intervention, differential prevention in order to help those who are more in need for such an help. So thank you again for the very interesting book. I was very much pleased to read it, and I really congratulate the editors, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you all the commentators for your great comments on the chapters. And maybe I will mention a few things, and then we have one question, and if others would like to ask, this is the time to write your questions. And the three of you actually mentioned the issue of cultural sensitivity, especially Dr. Saleh and Professor Israeli, I can't say the name, okay, Moshe. And I think that we should be careful in focusing only on cultural sensitivity, because it puts everything, and all the discussion will be taken toward cultural issues, ignoring all the political and different kind of effects that might affect the youth and the behavior and the situation. And I don't say, this doesn't mean that I don't believe in cultural effects, but we should be careful in putting all the emphasis on cultural topics and cultural factors. So when intervention should be culturally sensitive, it should be also taking into consideration the socio-economic and socio-political context of other things when we are going to build an intervention to help.
Can I add one more point here, please?
Yes, please, Elayan.
You know, I relate to that briefly, but when
you can open your camera.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll open my camera. I'm still in my office. When we talk about cultural sensitivity, we have to make a difference between cultural sensitivity and cultural competence. Cultural sensitivity, there is a universalism there. I mean, if we just would like to train our social workers, our teachers, our psychologists how to be aware to the differences, but they don't know how to do it. So in other words, the right term, with your permission, that's the cultural competence. Meaning if I work with the Palestinian people, so I became pretty much aware to the history, to the life of the Palestinian people, or to the Moroccan and Israel or whatever. That we have. So in terms of developing culturally appropriate models of intervention, that's probably the right way to say it here, because there is also cultural differences, and there's also differences among the people we are talking about, even within the same cultural issues, because, you know, it's a big topic, but just briefly, we talk about the process of acculturation. So we see even among our people, different level of acculturation that these people go. So in other words, we have to be aware of that. But in terms of implementing our interventions, we have to be pretty much familiar with the specific community or population we are dealing with. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think we should be use more the cultural competence on other factors than cultural sensitivity. It's the right term to use it in this context. And the other comment, and I will shortly summarize this, is the issue of age that was raised. Also, we should be careful when we are talking about children. And if I take it to the issue of juvenile delinquency, we know that in many cases, a lot of people or official systems use the issue of age in order to find ways to differentiate the punishment that they give for different children. And we know that this was one of the trends of waiving young children to the higher system, to the higher court system of the adults. And sometimes we should be also aware of that and more strict with having wider age of what we mean by children, and don't agree to the differentiation between very young children and then taking, like, as we know in the States, having kids that they can be waived to the adult system. So this is another thing. And also one of the things that was mentioned, that I believe that in the new studies, we will see that more and more, is the correlation between political violence and exposure to political violence and children and youth behavior in the cyber world, which was mentioned earlier. We know that from studies that I have conducted with other colleagues that Arab children who are exposed to community violence are more involved in cyberbullying. And we know, and based on that, I expect to find also the same trend with respect to political violence. And I believe that this will be one of the things that will be taken forward in the study of political violence. And also with my colleague Badi Hsesi, we have been also studying not only the effects of political violence on children and youth, but also the involvement of children and youth in political violence and how their involvement affects their behavior in different spheres, such as in the school, at home, and in different contexts. So I believe this is something also that we should be studying more, not only their exposure to political violence, which is very important, but we should also pay attention that, as we know, children are also involved in these activities as perpetrators, and we should be aware of that and check how this affects also them in different ways and their behavior and their involvement in juvenile delinquency in general, but in other kinds of antisocial behavior. So these are my comments. And Inat, you have, I know, a few questions, so you can open your your camera. Inat, we can see you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mona.
And we have also questioned the Q&A. You can also have it.
Yes, so thank you for the commentators. I think these were really intriguing comments. We have a few questions that were forwarded to the speakers, and I would like to raise them now. And after these questions, I think we'll open up for discussion by the speakers so that they can address these comments and also these questions, and the comments that have been made, and also make some final remarks on the book. And so the first question that was forwarded in the Q&A was the following. In the current Ziglis, it's hard to imagine that we will reach and change the minds of politicians to spare children. What efforts are being made in East Jerusalem and the occupied territories to protect Palestinian families and to intervene? We hope that you have some. So if the speakers have some insights that they want to share on the Palestinian territories, that would be wonderful. Another question that I had during the discussion regards the role of the international community. As has been said here by several of the commentators, we know that in order to intervene and protect children, we need provision of services by the state, by teachers, by social services, support that is needed for parents in order to engage with the situation and help their children. But usually the state is not functioning in times of crisis. And as was said here by several of the commentators, these administrative actors or teachers or parents are also partaking in the arena of political violence and conflict. And so here the role of the international community, I think, should be substantial. And I was wondering what kind of discussions or thoughts have you had on that role, except for international human law, human rights, of course, and international bodies. And I was thinking of the Syrian example as one in which I think the international community has failed to act in a way that has protected children in this situation. So I would love to hear comments on this. And another issue that came to mind in this global world of conflict and political violence regards children who are in refugees or asylum seekers, and how do we think should be should the move across borders be regulated? How to address the rights of these children? We know from the experience here in Israel that the rights of the child are very much pushed aside and related to the status of the parent. how do we address the situation, whether there is a need to differentiate between children and parents and families in these situations of refugee, what is the unit that is the most supportive, a place of rescue or the family itself. I think these are very pressing questions regarding the issues that you are addressing. So we have 15 minutes. I think we will let each of the editors speak for around 3 minutes, addressing these questions in the comments. And again, I invite people to write more questions in the Q&A so we can have another round. Charlie, Muhammad, Caroline, do you want to join us? Wonderful, thank you. So I see Charlie hasn't joined us yet. If you can open your camera and microphone. And Muhammad or Caroline, do you want to go first?
I'll let Mohammed go first.
Yes, thank you, Caroline.
You're on mute, Mohammed.
Okay, sorry. I will reiterate our sincerest gratitude to the commentators, Professor Krinawi, Professor Salah, and Professor Yisrael for their very thoughtful comments. I don't have much to add other than emphasizing the importance of contextualizing the interventions. Models that were developed in Western individualist societies might not be always applicable, or might be applicable but not enough effective to the same extent when they are practiced in Western collectivist societies. So I would like to pick up on what my colleagues, almost all of them, mentioned, the issue of cultural competency and cultural context. However, I think contextualizing is not only taking into consideration cultural aspects, but also economic aspects, organizational aspects, the role of the law in the country, to what extent is it respected or not, ethno-cultural and ethno-national aspects, organizational aspects, the availability and feasibility of mental health and social welfare resources. All these things should be taken into consideration, in my humble opinion, when we talk about intervention and prevention activities. Are they available in all countries to the same extent? Are they taken into consideration when the models of intervention that were mentioned and many others are there that were not included in our book? Are they taken into consideration when such interventions and preventions are applied in different contexts? I don't have a concrete response on this, but based on my experience on working in different fields like community violence and family violence, this contextualizing is a serious issue that should be considered, not only when we apply such models of intervention and prevention, but also when we assess them. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Muhammad, do you want to say something about the question that was raised here about what is being done for protection of families in East Jerusalem? The whole issue of whether there is the policy, the desire of politicians to continue to help or do the opposite.
Yes, I also wanted to forward you this question, and afterwards, Charlie, perhaps you will have the opportunity to respond as well.
To the same question. I don't know why this question was raised, especially on East Jerusalem. It's not secret that the killing and destruction and the practice of different types of structural and systemic oppression and racism prevail in the region. This is not a secret. These practices not only prevail and happen in the region. In my opinion, they also, besides affecting the children and families and organizations, they also become a barrier. They also become a barrier, professional barrier, economic barrier, organizational barrier for developing any interventions and the preventions in the region, including in East Jerusalem. And it's clear that, without going into politics, it's clear that during the last 10 years in particular, through the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but especially I would like to emphasize the last 10 years, the Israeli government have been so oppressive to the extent that does not facilitate the economic, organizational, and professional development that could face or could help or could try to help in mitigating the effects of the experiences that I mentioned: destruction, killing, racism, oppression, etc. In our book, in our study, Charlie, among 2,934 children and their parents, we found very severe effects of the Israeli conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, very severe implications of this conflict on children and their parents in terms of fear, depression, anxiety, thought problems, school violence, PTSD. We published about that in the same book, a chapter about some partial results of our study, and another article about these effects, without ignoring, of course, what mentioned Professor Israelishvili, the issue of resilience. These effects are so harmful for Palestinian children and their parents and their families, not only in East Jerusalem, but also in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. I'm not sure if I have the time to go through what should be done or what have been done. This is another issue, taking into consideration time limits of our meeting. But it's worth thinking and it's worth talking about.
I just want to go on and deal with some of the issues that were brought up both by this question and by the excellent comments of the three commentators, Professor Pranawi, Professor Salah, and Professor Israelishvili, that to point out a couple of things. One is that there was a call by particularly Asher Ben Aryeh to take into account what the children think in our research. I think he has a major point there that children should be listened to very carefully. There, in the book, there are a number of, remember the Professor Al-Qarnawi mentioned this, that there is both quantitative and qualitative research. And in both of them, essentially, the children were asked, were listened to in various different ways. There's much more that could be done about this. There's no question. We need some mixed methods research. I think that's important. Number one, I think another aspect of the book that I would just like to mention very briefly is a chapter by Cyril Banu and Lindsay Stark on ethics in research that has to do with who is the researcher and to what extent are children brought into the research itself. That is an important aspect of the situation, and the chapter is essentially a call for bringing children into the research process much more than has been done. It's kind of revolutionary. With regard to the long-term moral and political development of children that Professor Al-Qarnawi was mentioning, and the other speakers also, Professor Salah and Professor Israelashvili, what is going to happen to these children down the line? Long-term effects, long-term developments. There is one chapter in the book by Celia Weinreb on the moral development of children after having been recruited. This is done in South America, Colombia, where children were essentially recruited as child soldiers and had to do awful things, I won't even describe them here, to other people. And somehow they had to, in their own minds, when they were interviewed afterwards, make sense out of this. This leads to a real problem in their development and in their thinking about the world and thinking about themselves. This happens sometimes to soldiers who find themselves doing things that they under no circumstances would they ever be doing. This is a fairly neglected topic. On the other hand, I want to mention two things here that the book doesn't deal with enough, and which are topics for further thinking and research. One is the whole, there's no question, Muhammad, I agree that the government of Israel, on the general, even with a more moderate government that we have now, does not do enough to promote and protect, and sometimes their policies do the opposite. There are two aspects of this which I think we ought to relate to. One is, and this is in a number of countries, and it was mentioned prominently by Professor Salah, the role of NGOs, and particularly of the UN, of other countries. It's very interesting and hasn't been studied enough how much it has helped populations in various different countries which are disadvantaged and sometimes persecuted. They're not able to change the policy of the government in that country. But the very fact that they are there and raising their voices, and I go from the Middle East now to Myanmar, to what happened there, terrible things actually going on still as we speak. Somebody in Myanmar knows, and somebody in other countries know that somebody is watching, and somebody is helping the people who are disadvantaged. And I think that in the long run, that will have an effect. But this is something that has to be, understood and studied and encouraged. There's also the question of education. And I was asked this by a person who wasn't able to come, but whose political views are pretty clear. What about schools on both sides? What about schools on the Arab side, which essentially present the Israeli and the Jewish people as demons? And on the Israeli side, particularly, and I think on both sides, it's extreme religious education. Present the other side, the Arabs, the Palestinians, as demons. I don't think we have to go too far to say that this is what's causing political violence. There's a question here of how you develop motivation for engaging in political violence and for doing something which has been thought of as a possible alternative on both sides, on all sides, in all countries, nonviolent tactics to combat violence. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it very often falls apart at a particular level, whether it's South Africa or India or the United States, where it's been tried. But I think this is impossible. I think it's possible. Sorry. And now go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to stop you because
No, go ahead.
Really intriguing, but I want to give Caroline her 2 minutes before we have to conclude. And so, yes, Caroline, to you.
Well, I just wondered whether, when we're looking at issues of children's rights and political violence, whether the topic of children's rights has rather gone off the boil internationally, whether it's actually not so important. And then one wonders why, because you saw this huge period of push for improvement in rights, for enforcement of rights, for recognition of rights. And then suddenly we seem to be going backwards. And I think maybe that has something to do with the terminology that Professor Israelashvili was referring to. So as we see the rise of the use of sort of political violence and the move towards violent extremism, which also engages younger people and older children, whether that's shifting, whether children are beginning to be seen as perpetrators rather than as victims, as engaging rather than being recruited. So I think that's an issue. I also think that the whole concept of hearing children's voices has also gone much the same way. Where's all that push and dynamism for hearing children and involving children? I thought it was interesting that Professor Kranawi said, well, where are the children in the research? Yes, indeed, where are they? It's just, they're not there anymore. We're not consulting them, we're not hearing them. And then you've got to add to that increased exposure to political violence, far more so, given internet and access. And then, just to finish off, think of Syria, attacks on schools, attacks on children in civilian settings, abduction, displacement, detention, obstruction of humanitarian aid for children. But where's the screaming objection? Where's the huge international outcry? And we just don't see it in the same way, because important international actors are actually actively engaged in political violence. And I think those are all incredibly difficult issues to which I have absolutely no resolution. But I think they're all issues that need to be thought about.
Thank you. Wow. I think we can continue discussing all these issues for hours. But we have to conclude. So let me thank, first of all, the contributors to this wonderful book and the editors, Muhammad and Charlie and Caroline. It's been fabulous to hear you. The commentators in this event, Mona, thank you for your extremely valuable comments. And again, the Minerva Center for Human Rights. As I started with my introductory remarks, we are embarking upon this huge program on child and youth rights, and we're looking forward to upcoming collaborations with you, and we thank you for this very important contribution to the literature and the food for thought that you gave us in this event. So thanks again to you all, and to all participants, and I wish you a very nice evening, a good day to you in America, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good work. Good job.
Good job.